The brass bell above the heavy oak door chimed with a cheerful, melodic ring that seemed to mock the desperate woman standing beneath it. Inside, the bakery smelled of caramelized sugar, warm yeast, and the kind of expensive vanilla that only the wealthy could afford to taste. It was a scent that triggered a violent, hollow ache in Elena's stomach, a physical reminder that she hadn't eaten a full meal in 48 hours. She stood on the welcome mat, hesitating, her boots scuffed and covered in the gray dust of the city streets. Beside her, clutching the hem of her frayed denim jacket, was her 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. The little girl's eyes were wide, taking in the golden lighting and the glass display cases filled with pastries that looked like jewels. Sophie didn't ask for anything. She had learned the hard, silent language of poverty long ago. She simply stared, her small hand trembling in her mother's grip. Before we witness the moment that changed their lives forever, if you believe that a single act of kindness can echo through eternity, please hit that subscribe button for Prime Stories. Join our community, and let's prove that compassion is still the strongest force in the world. Now let's step inside. Elena took a breath that rattled in her chest, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't here by. Her pockets were empty, save for a piece of lint and a button that had fallen off Sophie's coat 3 days ago. She was here to beg, but not for money. She was here to ask for the garbage. It was a humiliation that burned her throat like acid. But looking down at Sophie's pale cheeks and the dark circles under her eyes, Elena pushed her pride into the deepest, darkest corner of her heart. They had shared a single, bruised apple yesterday, pitifully divided into thin slices to make it last. And today, there was nothing. The bakery, with its polished checkerboard floors and soft jazz music, felt like a cathedral of excess. Elena felt like a stain on the pristine scenery. She smoothed Sophie's hair, which was clean but tangled, and whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "Just stay close to me, baby. It's going to be okay." Sophie nodded, her gaze fixed on a tray of cinnamon rolls glistening with icing. The longing in her eyes was so pure, so quiet, that it almost brought Elena to her knees right there in the doorway. They moved toward the counter, their footsteps sounding too loud in the hushed atmosphere of the shop. The customers seated at the small, round iron tables were dressed in wool coats and silk scarves, sipping espresso and laughing about things that didn't matter. A few of them glanced up as Elena passed, their eyes flicking over her worn clothes and the smudge of dirt on her cheek, before quickly looking away. It was the invisible stare, the way society looked through people like Elena to avoid seeing the human tragedy standing right in front of them. Elena kept her head down, focusing on the counter where 2 employees in crisp white aprons were arranging a tray of tarts. They looked up as she approached, their professional smiles faltering by a fraction of a second. They saw the desperation. They saw the poverty. The shift in their demeanor was subtle, a stiffening of the shoulders, a guarding of the territory. They knew she wasn't a paying customer before she even opened her mouth. The air between them grew thick with unspoken judgment, a wall that Elena had to climb just to speak. "Excuse me," Elena said, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat, forcing volume into words that wanted to hide. I know this is strange to ask." The cashier, a young woman with a name tag that read Becky, raised an eyebrow, her hand hovering over the register. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but icy. Elena gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. Do you have any expired cake?" The words hung in the air, heavy and shameful. "Or maybe bread that is going to be thrown out tonight. For my daughter." She gestured slightly to Sophie, who was trying to make herself as small as possible behind Elena's legs. "She hasn't had a treat in a very long time. Anything you were planning to toss in the bin. Please." The cashier exchanged a look with her coworker. It was a look of annoyance, the kind that said, "Not another one." To them, Elena was an interruption, a nuisance disrupting the aesthetic of their high-end establishment. They didn't see the mother who would die for her child. They only saw a beggar disturbing the peace. But Elena was wrong about one thing. She wasn't invisible to everyone. In the corner of the bakery, sitting alone at a small table near the window, a man was watching. His name was Julian Thorne. He was one of the city's most successful real estate moguls, a man whose signature moved millions of dollars. But today he wore a simple, nondescript gray suit. He had come here to escape the noise of his boardroom, seeking the comfort of a quiet routine he never told anyone about. He had a slice of blueberry pie in front of him, untouched. Julian was a man who carried a silence within him that was louder than any crowd. Years ago, he had lost his wife and daughter in a car accident, a tragedy that had stripped the color from his world. He had buried his heart along with them, building walls of cold indifference that money couldn't scale. But as he watched Elena tremble at the counter, as he saw the little girl hiding behind her mother's coat, a crack formed in the ice around his soul. He saw the way Sophie looked at the glass case. It was the same look his own daughter used to have. And for the first time in years, Julian felt something other than numbness. The silence that followed Elena's request was excruciating. It stretched out, filling the space between the counter and the door, suffocating her. The cashier, Becky, sighed a small, sharp sound that felt like a slap. "Ma'am," she said, her voice tight with bureaucratic indifference. "Store policy. We can't give away food. Liability issues. You understand." Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a burning flush of shame that started at her neck and consumed her face. She understood liability. She understood rules. But she didn't understand how a world with so much food could let a child go hungry because of a piece of paper. "Please," Elena whispered, her pride completely shattered now. "I'm not asking for fresh food. Just the hard ends of the bread. Or a cupcake that fell. Anything." Sophie tugged on Elena's sleeve then, a gentle, heartbreaking motion. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's go. It's okay." The child was comforting the mother. That reversal of roles was the cruelest thing of all. Sophie knew they weren't wanted here. She had learned that her hunger was an inconvenience to others. Julian watched this unfold from his corner table, his hand gripping his coffee cup so hard his knuckles turned white. He saw the way Elena's shoulders slumped, the physical weight of the rejection crushing her. He saw the way the other customers studiously ignored the scene, sipping their lattes, protecting their bubble of comfort. He knew that bubble well. He had lived inside it for years, using his grief as an excuse to shut out the world. "Why should I care?" he had often told himself. "The world didn't care when I lost everything." But today the logic failed him. He looked at Sophie again. The girl had turned her head and was staring longingly at a strawberry cream cake on the middle shelf. It was decorated with fresh fruit and spun sugar, a masterpiece of confectionery. In her eyes, Julian didn't just see hunger, he saw a dream. He saw the innocence he had lost, the future he had been denied. A memory flashed in his mind. His own daughter, Emily, on her 5th birthday, face smeared with frosting, laughing in a way that made the sun seem dim. The memory usually brought pain, but today it brought clarity. Elena nodded to the cashier, blinking back tears. "I understand," she said, her voice hollow. "I'm sorry to bother you." She turned to leave, her hand tightening around Sophie's. She had failed. The walk back to the door seemed miles long. Every step was a testament to her inability to provide, a failure that screamed in her mind. She thought about the cold night ahead, the empty cupboards, the way she would have to sing Sophie to sleep to distract her from the growling in her stomach. She felt a profound sense of isolation, as if she were drifting in a dark ocean while everyone else was safe on a lit ship. She reached for the brass handle of the door, ready to step back into the gray reality of the street. But before she could push it open, a voice cut through the hum of the bakery. It wasn't loud, but it was commanding, a voice that was used to being heard. "Wait." Elena froze. She turned slowly, afraid it was the manager coming to scold her for loitering. Instead, she saw the man in the gray suit standing up. Julian Thorne moved with a calm, deliberate energy. He didn't look at the staff. He looked only at Elena and Sophie. He walked toward the counter, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who was tired of the world's cruelty and had decided, in this one small moment, to stop it. The cashier straightened up, recognizing the cut of his suit, even if she didn't know his name. Sir? She asked, her voice dropping into a respectful register she hadn't used for Elena. Julian ignored her question. He stood next to Elena, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne and old sorrow. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with recognition. He saw the war she was fighting because he was fighting one too. "I would like to place an order," Julian said, his voice steady and deep. He pointed a finger at the glass case, directly at the item Sophie had been staring at. "I want the strawberry cream cake. The whole one. The freshest one you have." The cashier blinked, confused. "Sir, that's a $60 cake. It serves 12. Julian didn't flinch. "I didn't ask the price. I asked you to pack it." He turned his gaze to the savory section. "I also want 2 of your roast beef sandwiches, heated, 3 croissants, 2 large containers of the potato soup, and a loaf of the sourdough bread." The bakery went silent. The other customers stopped talking. The staff looked from Julian to the homeless woman standing next to him, the connection slowly dawning on them. Elena stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her heart pounding against her ribs. She wanted to speak, to tell him he didn't have to, but her voice was trapped behind a wall of emotion. Julian turned to Elena for the first time. He didn't smile, not yet. His face was serious, respectful. "Is there anything else?" he asked her, as if she were a business partner he was consulting. "Does she like chocolate?" He gestured to Sophie. Elena couldn't breathe. She looked down at Sophie, who was staring up at the tall stranger as if he were a giant from a storybook. She loves chocolate," Elena whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Julian nodded. He looked back at the cashier. "Add 4 chocolate eclairs and a bottle of fresh milk." He pulled a black leather wallet from his inner pocket and produced a card that gleamed under the lights. "Pack it all. Now, please." The atmosphere in the bakery shifted instantly, the air changing from cold judgment to a frantic, shamed efficiency. The cashier, Becky, moved with a speed she hadn't shown all day, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the large white boxes. Her coworker rushed to heat the soup, the microwave humming a sudden, urgent tune. They wouldn't meet Julian's eyes, and they certainly wouldn't meet Elena's. The shame in the room was palpable, radiating off the employees and the customers who had stared so blankly just moments before. They were witnessing grace in real time, and it made their previous indifference look ugly in the reflection of the glass display cases. Elena stood rooted to the spot, her hand clutching Sophie's shoulder so hard she had to remind herself to loosen her grip. She felt lightheaded, the smell of the heating soup hitting her empty stomach with a promise that felt almost too good to be true. This wasn't expired food. This wasn't garbage. This was a feast. Julian stood silently while they packed the food, his posture rigid, like a sentry guarding something precious. When the bags were ready, 3 large paper handles heavy with warmth, the cashier placed them on the counter. "That will be," she started, but Julian waved a hand, tapping his card on the reader. The beep of the transaction sounded like a gavel falling. "Keep the receipt," he said quietly. He picked up the heavy bags himself. He didn't hand them to Elena like a handout. He didn't thrust them at her. He walked over to where she stood and lowered himself slightly, placing the bags gently into her trembling arms. The weight of the food was substantial, grounding her. "This is for you," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "And for her." He looked down at Sophie. The little girl wasn't hiding anymore. She was looking at the boxes with a mixture of awe and hunger that broke Julian's heart all over again. Elena looked up at him, her vision blurred by a thick veil of tears. "Why?" She choked out the word ragged. "You don't know us. I can't pay you back." Julian shook his head slowly. "You don't owe me anything." He paused, looking at Sophie's messy hair, seeing the ghost of his own daughter in the tilt of her head. "I had a little girl once," he said, the admission slipping out before he could stop it. "She loved strawberries, and she hated seeing anyone sad." He took a breath, the confession hanging in the air between them like a bridge. "Feeding you, it helps me. You're helping me more than I am helping you." Elena stared at him, seeing past the gray suit and the wealth, seeing the cracks in the man standing before her. She realized then that hunger wasn't just physical. He was starving too, just in a different way. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of a life saved. "Thank you for seeing us." Julian nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He turned to leave, needing to escape the raw emotion before he unraveled completely. He walked toward the door, his steps lighter than they had been when he entered. "Sir," Elena's voice called out, stronger this time. He stopped at the threshold, holding the door open, the sunlight streaming in around his silhouette. He turned back. Elena and Sophie were standing there, clutching the bags. Sophie raised a small hand and waved. A tiny, shy movement. "Bye," the little girl piped up, her voice like a wind chime. And then it happened. A smile broke across Julian's face. Not a polite, social smile, but a real one. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, warming the cold gray. It was the first time he had genuinely smiled in 3 years. "Take care of each other," he said. And then he stepped out into the golden afternoon, leaving the bakery behind. Outside, the world seemed different. The colors were sharper. The noise of the traffic didn't grate on his nerves as much. Julian walked 2 blocks, then stopped and looked back. Across the street, on a park bench bathed in sunlight, he saw them. Elena had opened the box. Sophie was holding a slice of strawberry cake with both hands, taking a bite that was so large it got cream on her nose. Elena was eating a sandwich, her eyes closed, her face turned toward the sun. They were laughing. It was a scene of pure, undiluted survival and joy. Julian stood there for a long time, watching them. He realized that for years, he had been trying to fill the hole in his heart with silence and isolation. But the hole could only be filled with this. Connection. Compassion. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed his assistant. "Cancel my meetings for the afternoon," he said, watching Sophie lick icing off her fingers. "I have some thinking to do. About a foundation. About hunger." He hung up and continued walking. The image of the mother and daughter burned into his mind, a beacon guiding him back to the land of the living. He understood now. The cake hadn't just fed a hungry child. It had fed his starving soul. Sometimes, saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that kindness is the cure for a broken world, please like this video and share with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Prime Stories for more tales that remind us of our shared humanity.